Good morning, everyone. First of all, we saw that the previous panel was one of our very important clients, the construction sector, and another one is the automotive sector. And it's a pleasure to be with two very important clients of the steel sector and two very good friends. General Motors on one side, as we can see here, and the other one is Proesa. Proesa is the holding of Metalsa, one of the most important elements in Americas. So to make it very quick, I would like to ask Jose Francisco to start, and then I'm going to receive the questions over here. Well, thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Alacero, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share this forum with Polo and Marco. Thank you for inviting General Motors to this forum. The automotive sector is going to evolve much more in the next 5 years than it has done in the last 50 years. And this technological evolution has a very important impact for the country, and it's going to have a very important impact for the automotive sector in Mexico, and of course, an important impact for General Motors. Why the impact with the technological evolution? Because the automotive sector in Mexico has become the economic engine of the country in the last years. The automotive sector is the engine. It's like an internal combustion engine that has been used, and then it's going to be an electric engine. And you can see the impact on the screen, and these are results from 2021, where we were significantly affected by the lack of material, the lack of microprocessors specifically, and the automotive sector in Mexico represents 3% of the national GDP. It represents 16% of the manufacturing GDP, 21.6% of the total exports of the manufacturing sector. One out of $5 that come to the country in foreign direct investment goes to the automotive sector, and Mexico is the fourth exporter of cars in world level. We have the seventh producer at the world level. The domestic market is one of the most competed around the world, with 54 different brands trying to conquer the Mexican clients, and this is a sector that generates over 1 million employments. So this technological evolution is very important for the country, because this is of course going to generate much more activity in the Mexican automotive sector. Why is it relevant for General Motors though? General Motors has presence of 87 years in Mexico. We started operations on September 23rd, 1935. Our first production plant was in Ejército Nacional and the street ferrocarril in Cuernavaca. And it was established in 1937. We produced 9 cars per hour, and we have transformed into the first employer in the automotive sector with over 1 million people. We are the first exporter of vehicles. We export to over 40 countries, and these cars are proudly created in Arizpe, Silao, and San Luis Potosí. We are the first producer of cars in Mexico. We are the first buyer of parts of components. Last year, we bought over $20,500 to over 650 vendors around the country in Mexico, and we are competing today to be the first brand in the domestic market after being number 2 for 13 years. We have been number 1 for 3 years, and we are about to close the year in number 1 in sales. So it's very relevant, this technological transition for General Motors, because we need to evolve in our country to be and to remain the most admired brand in cars in Mexico. So how are we going to do that? We are going to do it through the execution of the global vision that we have as General Motors, which is seeing the world without collisions, zero emissions, and zero bottlenecks. To do that, we need to generate 3 very relevant technologies. First, the electrification of our portfolio. Number 2, the generation of autonomous vehicles. And 3, the interconnection of the cars with other cars and with their environments. Unfortunately, I don't have much time to talk about this, but I'm going to focus on one of the pillars of the vision, which is seeing a world without emissions. So, how are we going to transform into a company that is based on cars to a sustainable development in the future? We have generated commitments with zero emissions goal, and these have experienced dates. For 2025, which, well, we are very close, we're going to launch over 30 different vehicle models that are completely electric, and they're going to come to Mexico, most of them. Other pillar is for 2035, 100% of our automotive portfolio is going to be based on electrical cars, and one of the most relevant ones that we are trying to push is for 2040. All of our operations, our vendors, and our products need to be zero emissions. So I'm going to be talking about how we're going to achieve these goals. In the electrification process in Mexico, we have three main strategies. First one is the transformation of our manufacturing footprint in Mexico. As I told you, we have 4 manufacturing sites throughout the country. We are transforming our operations in manufacturing, traditional manufacturing in internal combustion engines, and now we're manufacturing electrical cars. Second, we are transforming our vehicle portfolio. We're introducing the electric propulsion cars in Mexico, and one of the most relevant pillars is the vendors are going to be part of this technological transition, and I'm going to be talking about this in a few moments. A couple of years ago, we announced a very relevant investment in our manufacturing site in Ramos Arizpe, in an investment that is over $1 billion, and it's for the manufacturing of internal combustion cars. But nowadays we are creating drive units, which are the electric propulsion cars, and for 2023 we are going to have a rate of 65 vehicles per hour, the first electrical vehicles of Chevrolet brand. And we announced 2 programs. The first one is Chevrolet Blazer EV, and the second one is going to be Chevrolet Equinox EV. So our complex in Ramos Arizpe is going to be in charge of that, and in 2025 we're going to be working both with the internal combustion engines and with electrical cars, and in 2025 this site is going to be specifically for the manufacturing of electrical cars, and in the future we will be announcing what happens with our sites in San Luis Potosí, with our complex in Silao in Guanajuato as well. And talking about the product portfolio, we have already announced that we will soon have these products in our portfolio. As you already know, we commercialize 3 different brands in Mexico: Chevrolet, Buick, GMC, and Cadillac, and these products were already announced to be commercialized in our country. One of them, which is already available, is Chevrolet Bolt EUV, which is the first EUV completely electrical in our portfolio, and we will have also some products in Ramos Arizpe. Our portfolio is going to be having the Chevrolet Blazer and the Equinox, and we're going to have a crossover that is going to be added to the Mexican market as well. So we are transforming the manufacturing part, we are transforming our product, and we are transforming the relationship that we have with our vendors. As I told you, we have over 650 vendors in Mexico, and our plan is from 2025 to 2035, we will sign agreements in sustainability with our vendors. So what are these contracts or sustainability agreements? These is going to cover 3 execution plans. First, we're going to talk about environmental sustainability, where there's going to be a commitment in the reduction of carbon emissions in Mexico. Then they're going to implement a sustainability promise in the social part. So it means develop social programs of social responsibility. And the third part is going to be related to the governance part, where we will see an improvement of the practices in terms of the acquisition of materials in a sustainable way. So we already managed to close this cycle with the manufacturing, with the portfolio, and the most relevant part, which is the vendor part in Mexico. So every technological change has its own challenges and opportunities. I would like to share what we have in terms of electrification in Mexico. One of the main challenges is to understand the adoption of the technological process of the electrical cars in Mexico. We just have some information that lead us to know that for 2030, close to 15% of the total sales in our country are going to be electrical vehicles, which, well, the technological adoption is going to be different from developed countries like the United States, China, Europe, and of course, as manufacturing company, we want to boost that so that this adoption curve goes much faster with the implementation of public policies, generation of the policies, and of course, we are working together with the private industry, with the automotive sector, with the local, state, and federal governments so that we can make this possible faster. And we are working with the University of California, who has a lot of experience in this adoption of technological processes. Another opportunity that we see, and a very important challenge, is that with the new technologies, we are going to develop a new vendor group, and we are working on that in the region of the south part of the state of Coahuila. We have our site, and we have attracted a good number of vendors with the transformation of our site.
So we also see a big challenge in the creation of talent, talking about the evolution of technology and the relationships with the scholars so that we can align the needs that are created within our plants and the academy and also the academia and how we are developing our curriculum. So talking about the relationships, everything of the distributor network, they should also evolve with the new characteristics of the automotive industry. And a big challenge is that we have the objective of consuming 100% of renewable energies in our country, and by that is by 2040. And we are working with the federal government so that we can obtain that renewable energy on the shorter term so that we can abide by our promise before our stakeholders and society. So as a summary, General Motors is committed to zero emissions, and you can see that we have developed the strategy to transform our manufacturing plant, the vendors, distributors, and our product portfolio. Our new product portfolio is added to whatever we have as internal combustion vehicles that are efficient. The vendor basis is fundamental and essential for the future of fully electric vehicles and General Electric and General Motors, and the development of the market in Mexico, for which we are working since a few years ago. That would be all from my side, and I will give the floor to my friend Polo Cedillo. Thank you, Paco. Family, thank you very much. Good morning. How are you? So this is the story of my life. I'm always in the middle between my vendor and my client. They're all great and they're all pushing on both sides. So I'll see how I do when I finished. So that's excellent. The clock was going to change, but let me tell you a little bit about this industry and how we see that from the Metalsa perspective and how it has evolved. So this is what we do at Metalsa. We have a chassis that is a skeleton for a truck. It looks like a simple thing. It's about 200 parts, all of them assembled. There are 7 companies in the world that do truck chassis, and Metalsa is the #1 company. Those of you who are in South America, we have Hilux, Ranger, Amarok has a metal chassis, and that Dodge Ram, Colorado, Tuna, Tacoma, F-250, all of them have a metal chassis. So It works for four things. One is to absorb energy. Two is to give comfort to the driver. Then the weightlifting structure, it has a resistance for certain tons, and it's to pull weight. In North America, they pull motorbikes and things like that. So we need to keep that in mind because as it happens, the business model is changing, and it's changing for everyone. So what's going on in the world? As Paco was telling us, the electrification phenomenon is something that is happening and it will only be accelerated. There's no going back. There are some bumps along the road, like the biggest vendor for nickel is Russia, and the prices went just skyrocketed and things like that. But the electrification is coming. And so there is an analysis here by IHS and how they have tried to forecast and how they have consistently failed on the electrification phenomenon. And now the last estimate for 2030, 34% of the vehicles in North America will be electric. They will probably fail again, but because those curves are not usually behaving like that in this part. So they have this concept, this break in the business model because electric cars have a life cycle that is 3 to 7 times higher than the internal combustion. So if you sell an electric car, it will have a longer life than an internal combustion one, and that has an impact on the volume. But the biggest impact is autonomy. We're still a long way to go. We will discuss that later on, but that will change the business models completely because today we can foresee that there needs to be a car in the car drive, and when we have Uberless or driverless Uber, that will change drastically. So if we do the TCO or the total cost of ownership of your car, it will be cheaper to go by Uber. When this is completely autonomous, that will be even cheaper in terms of mobility. So for that, we need to set several things on the table. So with the autonomy topic is where or why do we want a car if I can order it and for it to come to me? I can even ask for experiences because if I want to have a car, I order a car. If I want a movie, I have a Boitier, and they have different concepts in the car. And you don't have a steering wheel, or if you're going to deliver, it needs to be like a shoebox and doesn't need any windows, and all these things that will be within the design. And this has several things implicit. So when you have your autonomy at a 4 or 5 level, because there are 5 levels, 4 or 5 don't need a driver. And when those are shared cars, there is a debranding phenomenon. What will happen to brand? Because brands appeal to you buying their car based on your use, your custom, your lifestyle, and based on that you choose. But if you're not going to have a car and you're not going to be a driver, then it completely changed the value offer. It was not General Motors, sorry. We changed it, but the dealer model is going to change completely because the relationship is dealer and consumer, and now we will have platforms that will give you a service, a mobility service, mobility as a service. Obviously, gas stations we are going to still have gas cars in rural areas, usually where there's no infrastructure, but for gas stations, the way that we know them as of now, they will be disappearing. Having a refinery is the most ridiculous thing, and nobody's doing it except for us, of course, right now. And then Uber has another business model issue because they depend on their drivers and the drivers giving their assets. So, if we don't have drivers, we don't have assets. And so there are different people who are trying to make Lyft models. Lyft is working with Argo. Argo was by Ford and Volkswagen to give a service, and they just discontinued it. Ford and Volkswagen are saying it's not the way, and General Motors is betting with the Cruise. And I will tell you later, but Cruise, I want you to visit it. It's a General Motors subsidiary, and they are giving robo taxis in all of San Francisco. So the robot taxis, when we talk about autonomy, it's not such a farther concept. Obviously, there are business models that we would like for them to go slower, but they're moving in that direction. So this is Enright. Enright did their first trip in the US. They had already done it in Sweden, and it's a completely autonomous car. They did the first one in Tennessee with the federal government permission so that they can drive electrodomestic devices from the General Electric to their warehouse in this device. So we are not talking about such a farther future. This one is a little bit farther. It's a drone taxi for mobility. They're going to change the way we move. And so this has been just recently tried in October in Paris. In 2024, they will be lending services as air taxis with, of course, no drivers and transporting from one way to the other. And so mobility, what we have seen change, it will change in the years to come with digitalization. And this is what happens to our chassis at the same time. It's split. So what happens with it? It ends up not working with this because it doesn't need to absorb energy. It's zero collision, so they will not crash. And if there will be no crashes, then does it need a zero or not to resist with the material? So that is a question. And then if you don't need to provide comfort to the driver, because we see the driver with a load here today, the cargo is going to, or the load is going to go into the shoebox or something. There are several chassis specs that are related with giving comfort to the driver. So my product becomes a very simple commodity. It's just to lift loads. And yes, we are going to need it, but then we have this volume issue because today trucks are parked 98% of the time, cars 94% of the time. If you have your car spent the whole day here. And in the future, you will not have that. There will be a platform with a service moving things and people from one place to another. So it does have a very serious impact on what is going on and what we are doing today in the automotive industry, and even how we should be transforming ourselves towards the future and what's coming. And the impact is for everyone. Will there be a world? Yes, we are just going to move differently. So what do we do with this? I wanted to tell you what we have done with this after that. So how you reach different scenarios for this. So 4 years ago, we got together and we started smoking weed and we started imagining the world in 3 dimensions. And you said, what's going on? So maybe electrification does not stick. So that's the orange scenario. What if it does hit? That's the green one. And what about autonomy and electrification hit all over? Well, some places in the world will move differently. Some places will remain orange, but there are regions in Europe, for example, where they're painting a completely green picture. And there are cities and regions in the U.S. that are being green or becoming green, and they're starting to dye blue. And for each one of them, we should have a different strategy. And so just to see how these things move, we need to be aware of different things. One is technology, because what it does is allow for things to happen. And so technology, we wanted to drive cars from satellites. And with the quantic capacities, it's the IoT, which is what Paco was stating a few moments ago. So they have their own processing, their own algorithms, and they decide what action to take. The key technologies for this to keep moving, and then legislation. How does legislation change so that it can move differently? The IRA, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act has a boost for the electrification, $7,500 a bond, so that you can have an electric car that complies with the different manufacturing characteristics in in North America, and that is going to move everything. The legislation as well, so that autonomous cars can drive in the streets. So they said, "Oh, LA will never have an autonomous car," and yes, it will. But cities like Phoenix, San Francisco, Austin, who have autonomous car in their streets. And then another topic is infrastructure. In Noruega, they bumped the into walls because there were not enough chargers, and there was enough energy but not enough of a grid to charge these cars, and that's how we can develop. So the consumer taste is important too. What does the consumer want? My mom says, I would never get in an autonomous car. And I asked my son, and he said, I don't want a driver to be there. And there are different views. And obviously, the geopolitical topic is key. Batteries, since the last 15 years, they have been lowering their income, and also they bumped into roads, and then they started commitments. Why? Because Russia is the main nickel vendor. And so then we have China and the inshoring and the whole electrification value changes in China. And that's not creating in America, and that will not happen fast. So it's not about what's going to happen, but about when. That is the question. And this thing I'm showing is to measure how that evolution is going to happen. You will see how this will unfold. The other super important point, and last one actually I want to mention, is climate change. So the topic of climate change, this is a tornado from what happened a few meters away from the F-160, and actually we would have left Ford without chassis for about a year. It went near the factory, so this has several corners to pick from, and the goal is to become net zero and to see how we contribute. But seeing how the temperature is increasing, it's bringing faster impact to the earth and it's happening faster than we expected. And so we will have more aggressive strategies towards autonomy so that we can make it more efficient and to have less of an impact in the planet. With that, I close my presentation so that we can open the Q&A section. Thank you very much. Paco and Paulo, thank you very much. Both your presentations were great. They give a lot of food for thought. I got a few questions now. Send more if you have them. I will start with the easy ones, but I will leave the harder for later. So this is a question for both of you. You started, Paco, talking about vendors and how you have this database in Cabo Sarispe and you were growing. So in this whole geopolitical context, the question would be, well, what about friendshoring and inshoring if that really happens in Mexico and Latin America? And they ask me particularly, like, what are the challenges for this to actually come? What do we have to do as either companies or governments or countries for this to happen? So I will start with you, Paco. Thank you. I have Monica Garcia today here, and she is our global purchase and supply chain in Mexico, and she leads. And as a country, we have an important opportunity. I think we are living the opportunity of being able to attract investments into our country, mainly investments in other regions, in countries, mainly in Asia. And we are running a few scenarios to attract those investments to our country. And the main challenges that we are facing are basically the saturation in some regions. Today, those of us who have operations in the central part of the country, the new hub in San Luis Potosí, for all of us who have operations in the north, we are seeing an important saturation and concentration of the vendors and tier 2, tier 3, tier 1 vendors, and that is reflected in the scarcity of spaces to be able to operate and, of course, have the freedom of having the ability to feed energy and available water. And I think that is an important challenge for us to create other geographical spaces so that we can create these bases. The second topic is talent scarcity. We believe that nowadays one of the biggest challenges that we have as a country is to continue creating or forming engineers at the different schools, both private and public, but talent that is also aligned with the new technologies, considering that what we want to import into our country are technologies that are not existent in the automotive industries, like the entertainment systems, the generation of different components that require different talent from what we currently use in the sector. So I think that these two sectors or two factors are relevant, and we need to strongly push for the logistical part in our country, because we were talking about the railway and road and the port saturations are becoming an important challenge, not just for the automotive industry, but for other industries. And I would believe that those are the main challenges we're going to be facing when we are trying to attract vendors that are outside of North America. Hi, I have a question. Yes. I agree with Paco. I will not say what he said again. I think I would just add two things. So the lack of certainty is an obstacle. This issue that if you invest or not investing, if we have a political climate, if there will be light or not, should we have will we have energy or not? Are we concerned, or is a client concerned? As it was said, moving your operations from Mexico to the U.S. I don't understand that topic, and I don't know how it's going to go. So besides that, it is having implications in the decisions of some companies, and so we can capture this moment in on short, and we are falling short in terms of infrastructure. So talent we can all work on, but a lot of it is infrastructure: roads, ports, trains, energy, place, and certainty. The last ones, except for talent, has a lot to do with the government. How are you working with the government, or how can we work with the regional government so that this really makes them realize, or if they can help us find that out in our countries. So over here, we've started working in 1935, and actually, when we see the political history in our country, especially for recent times, we've seen an important alternance from the state towards the federal part. And part of the responsibility of leaderships in organizations like ours is protecting the assets we have invested in Mexico, continuing to structure an environment where we have investment in our countries, in our country. An essential part of my work is to talk to corporations and to continue making Mexico an attractive place. And for it to be attractive, of course, the responsibility of our leadership is to have wide open and vocal communication in what we need as an industry and what we need as a sector, so that those investments continue to get to our country. Nowadays, we have a government relationships team whose work is to work with the Secretariat of Economy, the Secretariat of Energy, so that we can establish those needs and for them to be executed with the aim of making the automotive industry to continue to be the economic driver in Mexico. There's a lot of collaboration with the states where we operate, the state of Mexico, Guanajuato, San Luis Potosí, and Coahuila. And obviously that function of ours to empathize so that this sector can importantly grow in Mexico. Anything else, Polo? Yeah, I think just recognizing what the government is doing, especially with the vacations and the minimum wage. We are very poor in that sense, but also having what's not working and what's not causing the cake to be bigger. We want the cake to be bigger, and we want better slices for everyone. So, in terms of the politics and the infrastructure, there's no way. And so, we have been doing that with cameras and linking with the government so that we don't just leave that off. So we have the tough questions, and I will give it to Paco, not so directly, but we saw in your presentation that there is a pathway that you have very well understood as the target of 2040 to be a zero emissions. So steel is an important vendor for the automotive industry. We are, and we want to continue being that. I didn't say that as an introduction, but for us, this industry is not just the client that is most important, but the one that is more demanding, and that's how we transform as well. So I think that's why it is important for us to keep working hand in hand. But so for 2040, probably will demand the industry, the siderurgical industry, to be a zero emission industry, or at least zero emissions in the part where we have the General Motors as a client. Is there a price differential? Are they willing for me to have a much more expensive definition? How are we going to define that? Yeah, I can see that it was asked. Why was it not for Polo first? No, he's right in the middle. Yeah, I mean, that is not a part of the automotive sector to have a proposal or a vision to be carbon emission neutral. And as Polo was saying in the beginning of the presentation, it's not with the environment but with society. It's a commitment with our few generations and the world. Because it's not a matter of, at the end of the day, having a cap of price differential to avoid for us to go up there. So I think that commitment is public. And actually, the commitment in the U.S. was cut short for 5 years. And that talks about us being serious and saying, well, we need to be coherent and to align with our vision. So we need to execute that. And today we are seeing the possibility of seeing a world with zero emissions, zero congestions, and so in order to get that is to decarbonize our manufacturing plants, the vendors and the product portfolio, and also abiding with the goals for 2025, a portfolio 35, with the production of only electric vehicles, and by 2040 we can consume in all of our network with the vendors and our clients sold with renewable energy. So that is something that the whole industry is going to generate, because if we analyze my competitor's vision, practically all of us are going to the same place. And I think what's essential is doing what's right for the next generations and society and the different implications that these have. And so we will need to sustain them to be sustainable in the market. Yeah, we're talking about the introduction and things like that. You talk about what Metalis does is the chassis, and then you painted a completely different panorama of where the market is going and the products, where the products are going. You spoke about mobility in the industry, in the automotive industry. And so, what is the chassis and Metalsa doing in the future, and what changes are you looking at or are you seeing in the direction of Metalsa? Actually, that's very good that you asked, because the orange world is domain. The green world, it's just the electrification of F-150, Toyota, Stellantis, and we have some products with General Motors for the electrification. So the green world is past. The blue world, there's no clear strategy in that sense yet. So what are we looking for? We're looking like a portfolio to say, well, how can we invest in a different way? But the blue world has serious implications And what Metalsa is doing is beside the chassis, we do skateboards. We do full skateboards to startups. And so, can that be a solution? Yeah, it could be a solution to help you electrify new key players that need manufacture that you can integrate differently. Yes, does it solve the autonomy world? No. I would be saying a big lie if I told you how to solve this. I know that the structure will be there, but it will be an extremely commodity oriented and rustic perspective. What about the Jigar? Well, for the past 2 years, I would assume that we all suffered from, we can't buy a new car because of the lack of semiconductors and some parts. There's a situation, and I will link two questions. Do you see that normalizing, at least in Mexico, North America, and what you are up for? And then, two, that creates an idea that there is a higher demand than production. So, do you think that once we regularize production, the demand is really there? Or is it just the demand that we will see? This is actually the second question, a demand for cars at a shorter term, 2023, 2024, where the general demand is going to drop?
Well, behind the cameras, I was talking about the lack of microprocessors and the impact that the automotive sector had. And this is generated by the two main industries. The first one is the electronic consumption industry, which consumes almost 80% of the production of microprocessors worldwide. And the high demand that was generated in the electronic consumption during the pandemic that was, well, amazing. So now, of course, there was a growth in the automotive sector. Now the perfect storm is created. We're missing microprocessors. We have down stops in our plants. Now the finished products are not getting to our consumers, and this generates an unsatisfied demand. So the electronic consumption demand is more regular now. The demand in the automotive sector is going to be lagged, and it's going to be covered in at the beginning of the year. And what we see here is a regular trend at the first semester, and it's going to be stabilized in Q3 of the following year. So we're going to go to healthier inventories, faster demand, the stabilization of the cash flow that is going to be much smarter. And it's not good to have an unsatisfied demand in the market, but it has given us a new reality that the automotive sector needs to materialize and capitalize. Well, we have a huge sign here that says thumbs up. So thank you so much for being here today, Marco and Paulo, for being here today with us. And this is a Latin American Association of the Steel Sector, and we always want to have new clients. We always want to have people like you to propose new things and to see where we can work together. Thank you so much.